Authority is seductive, not because it gives you power over others, but because it gives you the illusion of certainty. Tonight's question is not comfortable, but it is necessary. When did arrogance masquerade as authority? Not when you were confident, not when you were competent, but when pride put on a crown and called itself leadership. So join me now in and through the Static Seance.
The whisper caught between stations, neither here nor gone. The hum of voices trapped in the wires, their confessions dissolving into static. A seance not in candlelit rooms, but on flickering screens, where the ghosts don't knock, but distort the signal. Shadows coil in the white noise. If only one dares to alter their own frequency and listen.
Berith is associated with oaths, or false crowns, with titles that shimmer but don't actually hold weight. In older texts he appears as a king, but one who deals in deception, in borrowed legitimacy, in power that looks solid until examined. Psychologically, Berith governs a particular shadow, the moment you mistake conviction for qualification. The moment you assume volume equals command. The moment you believe feeling strongly about something means that you understand it. And that power borrowed from the ego collapses. And collapse can be humiliating. But humiliation is not destruction. It is correction. Berith doesn't ask if you've ever been right. He asks whether you've ever been loud without being grounded. Because people often mistake confidence for dominion. You believe that if you speak firmly enough, you are justified. You assume that because something angers you, you are automatically aligned with truth. Anger feels powerful. It sharpens language. It accelerates thought. It makes you feel decisive. But decisiveness without direction is just force. And force without wisdom corrodes credibility. Authority requires consent, not volume. You cannot demand respect into existence. You can intimidate people into silence, and you can overwhelm them into submission. But that is not authority. That is pressure. And pressure dissipates the moment that resistance organizes. When I ask myself honestly, when did arrogance masquerade as authority? I don't have to look far. There was a time when I would speak with authority about things that I was just simply emotional over. I felt strongly, deeply, viscerally, and I mistook that intensity for insight. I could point out what was wrong in a situation with precision. I could name dysfunction. I could identify hypocrisy. But I had no real knowledge of how to fix anything. And that matters. It's one thing to expose a problem. It's another to provide a path forward. Without that second piece, criticism just becomes performance. I thought because I could articulate the flaw, I had earned the right to command the solution. But I didn't have one. What I had was emotion. And emotion is not authority. It's information. And Berith exposes that gap. He stands in the space between oath and ego. And oath binds you to responsibility, and ego binds you to an image. And I had to confront the reality that sometimes I wasn't even trying to help. I was just trying to win the argument, win the moral high ground, win the room. And that's not sovereignty. That's insecurity dressed in certainty. So let's talk about the past a little bit. When did pride blind you? When did you believe that because you cared, you were qualified? When did you use intensity to compensate for a lack of clarity? And naming that won't erase it, but it will integrate it. Authority without accountability collapses inward. And I learned something crucial over time. It is absolutely valid to recognize incorrect behavior. It is absolutely valid to feel discontent. But unless you can offer an alternate path, unless you have taken the time to formulate a solution, you are not leading. You are just reacting. And reaction is not rulership. It's reflex. So now let's talk about the present. Where does ego linger? An ego lingers in the urge to respond immediately, in the impulse to correct publicly instead of addressing privately, in the desire to be seen as right rather than effective. And that's subtle because it doesn't feel malicious. It feels urgent, but urgency is not always aligned with wisdom. Since authority requires consent is built on trust is built on integrity, and integrity is built on consistency between word and action. The transformation to this place of understanding is quiet, because integrity replaces intimidation. Instead of escalating an emotional fight, you simply recognize your discontent. You step back, you examine it privately. You ask, what is actually wrong here? Then you ask, what would better look like? And only then do you speak. And when you do, your tone changes. It's not weaker, it's clearer. There's that difference in saying, this is unacceptable, and saying, here is a better way. One asserts dominance, and the other offers direction. Berith teaches that sovereignty begins within. If you cannot rule your own reactions, you cannot credibly guide others. If you cannot restrain your ego, you cannot wield authority without corruption. And so with the future, what humility restores power? Humility is not self-erasure. It is accurate self-assessment. It is knowing when you don't know. It is asking questions instead of issuing commands. It is recognizing that leadership is service, not spotlight. Humility restores power because it makes authority sustainable. Power that comes from ego requires constant defense, but power that comes from integrity reinforces itself. You don't have to protect it aggressively. It just stands. Berith's shadow shows you false crowns. Moments when you wore authority without having earned it. Moments when you spoke from feeling instead of from knowledge. Moments when you escalated instead of constructing. But his lesson is not condemnation. It's simply recalibration. You rule yourself first. Before you correct someone else, you check your motives. Before you challenge publicly, you examine privately. Before you assert, you prepare. That's sovereignty. Power borrowed from ego collapses because ego is unstable. It fluctuates with validation. It reacts to criticism. It needs witnesses. But power grounded in self-rule is steady. It doesn't need to dominate, doesn't need to shout, doesn't need the performance. It speaks when necessary. And when it does, people listen, not because they're intimidated, but because they trust the source. So ask yourself carefully, when did arrogance masquerade as authority? Not to shame yourself, but to refine yourself. Because authority is not about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the most aligned. It's about knowing when to act, when to wait, and when to admit that you need more information before you can move. That's real command. And it doesn't collapse. It endures.
She licks the magic mirror, drinks the milk blood off my arm. Her smile grows a little fever as the snake learns how to charm.